Tom Gresh of Salinas Insurance Group, as you see right here behind me, is Vice President of Salinas, a Marsh Mac agency founded locally in 1959. He's one of South Florida's most recognizable brokers in the marine insurance industry and holds the designation of Certified Marine Insurance Professional. He's a Fort Lauderdale native and former yacht captain with strong ties to the marine community, of course, and graduated from Lynn University with a bachelor's degree in international business and has held his 100-ton U.S. Coast Guard license since 1903. And he'll introduce any other panelist. I'm sorry. That's what it says there. 1993. He's not as old as I am. Come on. And then he'll handle any other. Where are you, Tom? There you go.
Time keeps on slipping, slipping, slipping into the future.
That's an old song too. I don't know if I remember that one. But 1903, I would have been a pirate, not a captain, probably. And we did forget to introduce Sean Blue, that flew in from New York. He is the head of AIG Worldwide Watercraft, and he's a great resource for us and the whole community, and we're glad to have him here. How about today?
I'm just here to tackle Tom if he says anything.
Yeah, if I say something bad, right. But no, he's the head cheese. He's the one that makes everything happen, from claims to the underwriting prospect to the policy issuing. Everything goes through him. So today we're going to talk a little bit about yacht insurance and what do I have and what do I do. I have a 2-year-old daughter and a 6-year-old son, and the other day I picked my son up from school, and he says, "Daddy, what do you do for work?" And I said, "Well, I help people get insurance for their yachts." And he said, "That doesn't sound like a lot of fun." So I kind of had to explain to him why it is fun, because I get to go to the boat shows, hang out with great people, meet people, go get on our clients' yachts and everything. And our clients are unique. They can often be fun and challenging to work with all at the same time. So for me, that's fun, and still get to keep in the industry. I had a client recently, and closed his boat and placed insurance with him. And he called me up, we were talking, and he says, "You know, Tom, I sent you all this money. And, well, we used to mail the policies, now we email them, but he emailed me this PDF." He goes, "What do I have? What do I get? I sent you this money, but what do I really get?" So we're going to take a minute and see what he gets. Right now in the marketplace, there's 9 different insurance companies that write yacht insurance. That's a lot. Probably five years ago, there was 5. They're all different. They all have different policy wordings, different premiums, certainly different appetites of what type of boats they like to write, and they all handle claims differently as well. So we're going to look. There's 2 main, here, that was actually my first slide. So there's 2 main types of yacht insurance policies. One is an indemnity policy. One is called first party pay. Indemnity policies are typically Lloyd's of London policies. Indemnity means pay after. So if a client has a claim, they would be responsible to pay the repair to damage and seek reimbursement from the insurance company. First party pay are domestic policies like Sean's company, AIG, and they pay in advance. You go to the yard, service facility, you get an estimate for the work, and the insurance company writes a check for the work in advance. Within the insurance policy, there's 2 main sections. There's the property and the liability. Let's look at some of the typical property coverages in the yacht insurance policy. Well, we got the hull. So that's the boat. If a fire comes, disappears, the owner gets paid for the agreed value in the insurance policy. Machinery breakdown, that's separate. If we have a catastrophic failure of the engine just blows up, stops working, happens all the time. Sudden and accidental is the key word there. Lack of maintenance, wear and tear is not covered. One thing we see with machinery is that you always want to have the captain or the owner keep a very detailed log of how he maintains the engine, complete this 1,000-hour service on time, have certified mechanics do the work, because when a bearing goes or a rod goes or something like that, the insurance companies wants to look at the maintenance logs of the engine, or they're going to say, hey, lack of maintenance. So we need to prove that the engine was maintained. And the engine claims can be significant. We just had one this year. It was on a 90-foot yacht, and the end payment was near $700,000, not just for the engine, but they had to cut the boat apart just to put the new engine in there. So it's pretty significant, and we want to get that paid claim for the owner, the claim paid for the owner. Some other coverages: personal effects, tenders, fine arts, mopeds and motorcycles while they're stored on board, loss of charter income. It's been a big one recently. We see that. And so if the boat's in the yard, it has to be repaired for a couple months, there could be coverage for loss of charter income. The key with that also is the charter has to be on the books. You can't make up a charter or book a charter while you're in the yard. Confiscation in war. This is an optional coverage, very important coverage. And you say, well, how do boats get confiscated? It's really more of an international coverage. Example is there was a yacht, it was a couple years ago, went to Mexico and the captain failed to declare firearms on the boat. Well, they came in, they looked around, and they find they have some ammunition and firearms, and they confiscated the boat. And when they confiscated the boat, they brought it to the commercial pier, and the thing banged up in the commercial pier and caused significant damage to the boat. There's even one boat that was a total loss from that scenario. It's a very important coverage. Another neat coverage that many companies are now offering is the precautionary measure expense. Companies offer up to $5,000 for you to haul or move your boat out of the pathway of a hurricane or named storm. So that's a great coverage for people. I'm going to let Sean expand a little bit on property losses, some unique claim situations dealing with property.
Well, first of all, despite what Bob Dennison says, selling insurance is fun. I mean, it's a blast. So, but I thought it would be interesting to you guys just to hear a little bit about where our losses come from, where our biggest causes of losses, and maybe hear an example of a big property hull loss that we had. Tom mentioned precautionary measures up to $5,000. That's the most frequent claim that we pay out at AIG. I can't speak for other carriers, but I think it's pretty common that a lot of carriers in advance of a storm would provide coverage to get your client reimbursed to haul their boat, get it out of the water, save it from the impending storm. And I think a lot of our clients don't realize they have that coverage on their policy. So, you know, if we have habitual offenders, it's an issue, but the coverage is really there to protect and provide resources for the client to get their boat out of the water from the impending storm, and it's the most common claim we have. The second most common claim that we see is struck submerged objects or grounding claims, soft grounding claims, followed by mechanical breakdown, and then fire. Weather is in there too. Weather can encapsulate a lot of different types of losses, whether it's a hurricane loss or whether it's a loss that's, you know, a bad squall, sea conditions, what have you. But fire is our most devastating cause of loss. It's certainly the biggest cause of big, severe losses. The largest loss that we've had in our books is a fire loss. It's a $22 million fire loss on a very large sailing yacht. And this fire loss wasn't that destructive to the hull. It was an electrical fire where the smoke emanated through all the void space in the boat. And if the yacht had had itself equipped with a thermographic camera, which it didn't, or surface piercing nozzles for expanding foam, which it didn't have, that $22 million loss would have been $1 million or $2 million loss. As it stands, the crew couldn't find the fire. The smoke emanated through all the void space. All 20 miles or so of wire, cable had to be replaced or cleaned on that boat. Every piece of soft texture, cushions, carpet, all of that stuff had to come out and get replaced. And that's where the $22 million went. Those are our most severe losses. Our second example of a big loss that we had was a captain on a 65-foot sport fish boat down in Florida. He had the boat hooked up to shore power. He decided he was going to clean the engines with brake cleaner out of an aerosol can. He had a flat of 3M brake cleaner, nothing against 3M, great product, a flat of aerosol cleaner ready to clean the engines on his boat. He's down there standing between the side of the hull and the engine block, and the air conditioner kicked on. So you can imagine the explosion that ensued. So you know, those types of fire losses or explosion losses, while they're not frequent, they're extremely severe and impactful into our bottom line results.
Thanks, Sean. And one thing on the precautionary expenses that I actually had a client call and says, hey, I just booked a haul-out expense, it's $4,000. Can I get my precautionary expense reimbursed? Well, not until there's a named storm or hurricane and we're in the path of that and you actually use that haul-out, can you get it? So the next section of the yacht insurance policy is the liability side. We're going to look again what you get, and we're going to look at some of the coverages. Third-party liability, if you're sued, the owner is sued. Defense, they will defend you in a lawsuit. Medical coverage, medical is kind of unique. I like it. It's no-fault coverage, so if you have a bunch of people on your boat and the yacht and everyone's drinking and have a good time, that happens. And someone wants to juggle steak knives, and a steak knife goes through someone's arm, he's got to go. It's crazy, it happens. With fillet knives, but goes through someone's arm, you know, he's got to go get stitches, take him to the hospital, medical pays that without question. So, no fault. Uninsured boaters, pollution, cleanup, fines and penalties associated with that, marine environmental damages, damaged coral reef or sanctuary, wreck removal. Well, what's wreck removal? Well, wreck removal would be if your boat or your yacht sank in the ICW or in the waterway or in a channel. I mean, you got to move that boat. You're blocking. You're impeding the waterway there. So they're going to pay to remove that. The most important coverage, I think, here is the crew coverage. So the crew coverage is covered underneath the liability, and crew are protected underneath the Jones Act. It's a very large exposure for the owner. It can be an unknown exposure for the owner. Many people don't understand it. It can be fairly scary to people because of the broad coverages or the broad exposure it has. So the Jones Act was founded in 1920 by Congress. They know they needed some coverage for the seamen. They didn't have any coverage. So what they did is railroad workers had some great coverage, so they took the exact same coverage from railroad workers, gave it to seamen, and they called it the Jones Act. So crew does not have workman's comp. Just like a lot of normal employees, you're injured at work, the workman's comp would kick in and pay for any of your injuries or suffering or long-time injuries, in fact. So the Jones Act is really just a vehicle for the crew to collect if they're injured. The unique feature is that they can sue in federal court and often have to sue in federal court to receive compensation for the injury. The biggest question, which makes this a little scary, is who is crew and when are they crew? So subcontractors and contractors are certainly not crew. I had a friend, I didn't insure the yacht. It was about 4 years ago, and the yacht was a 90-foot boat, but the boat sat at the marina. The owner used the boat twice a year. So he said, I'm going to be a contractor now. I'm going to have a little service company. I hired a couple people washing the boats. Now he's getting paid as a contractor. Well, he was on the top deck, fell down, and he broke his neck. This is a real story. He had 2 children. He had no coverage underneath the yacht policy. He's a contractor. He has a business. He's responsible for his own insurance. He had no workman's comp. He had no health insurance. He had no disability insurance, and those are expensive types of coverages to purchase also. So I do see that a lot from some of the captains now that said, hey, I want to be a service company. But they're giving up a lot of big benefits for that. And the main reason they want to be a service company is maybe they want to write off their truck or write off some expenses. But they're certainly giving up a lot of coverage, and they're taking on a lot of exposure for a small gain. So I'm going to go to Sean again. He's going to bring up some liability
Yeah,
concerns.
a couple examples. I mean, crew welfare is our single largest P&I loss, both in frequency and severity. There's nothing that's even a close second. It's crew welfare. Some of our obligations, or the yacht's obligations to the crew, that might be surprising to you that we cover. Our single largest P&I claim was resulting from an auto accident where a crew member lost an arm while she was driving to the store to get provisions. Multi-million-dollar loss that's covered under the P&I section. We also had a yacht that is often here in Fort Lauderdale. It's a foreign flag vessel. Crew member is foreign. The boat's here. And the crew member, in this case the first officer, is a member of a rugby league. And during his regular Sunday morning rugby match, he blew out his knee. But he's technically still in service of the yacht because he was supposed to report back to the yacht that day, later in the day. He's not, the boat's here on a part-time basis. So in those situations, we're obligated to cover that injury, even though it had really nothing to do with his service to the yacht. He was in service to the yacht at the time of employment. We see the same types of losses, whether these crew are skiing, whether they might be, in a bar fight. There's all types of scenarios that get covered under the P&I in terms of that crew welfare. And it's our single biggest expense from a liability standpoint. I mentioned fire under hull. Fire's up there too. It's not second, third, or fourth, but large fires tend to go down the dock, and we certainly have a lot of liability in those fire situations. So, when there's caps in marine law and there's limitations of liability, but when you're thinking about how much liability is enough, one of these things to consider at times is, who's around you, what other yachts are around you. Tom brought up day workers, and I think that's a great point. And to drive that further home, we know that a lot of yards will require that any person working on the boat show some evidence of liability. And we often see a lot of clients, insurance brokers, trying to put forth day workers as crew, and they really aren't. Most yacht policies will exclude those types of employees or those types of workers as crew. But it's a very common practice, and it's one that the insurance industry, not just myself or AIG, takes a pretty dim view on, is day workers that are being masquerading as crew. They're not covered. Day workers, whether they're a boat detailer or an artisan, need to have their own liability, and I would encourage you to advise your clients of such.
Probably another important fact to say is the number of crew. A lot of times the captains or even the management company or the owners wouldn't notify us if they're expanding their crew, when that would be in effect, if they're expanding their crew, and that could jeopardize coverage. A lot of times they take on crew and the captain hires crew, but nobody tells us. So that can be also a big exposure. So we have all these wonderful coverages. Let's take a look at this example here, and this is physical damage, and let's see what the client has. The sad part of this story is 10 years ago, this was my client. He's still, actually it was about 12 years ago, but he's still my client today. He has a yacht. Someone did insure him. So it was July 4th, and I got a phone call, and his name's Don. His real name is Don. Everyone knows him. He's on the internet, probably all over the web. So he calls me up. He says, "Tom, I got a problem." I said, "Well, what's going on?" He goes, "Well, I'm at the bar, and everyone's staring at me. I don't know what to do." I go, "What do you mean?" I go, "What do you mean?" He goes, I was just running down the beach, and I got a pilot like you told me to do, and I was running, and I hit the reef, and I didn't know what was going on. The alarm's going on, so I took the boat, and I put it on the beach." So what he did is he went out. It was in Harbor Island. If you can see the pink sands there. And he went out the south side, which is a sand cut, but the pilot wasn't available, so he took a dock boy out in his little boat, and the dock boy pointed that way, and so he went this way, thinking he was in Florida and parallel the coast and take a nice trip down the coast, but in Harbor Island, out of that cut, the reef goes out almost at least a mile. So he hit the reef and ended up in front of Pink Sands Resort, calling me from the bar. So So let's see, it's a true story. Let's see what this guy has. So, well, he certainly has hull coverage. We can see the boat's totaled. So if any of his guests were injured on the boat, he has third-party liability. He had a tender on the boat that was stolen at night. We can, along with some other things. Well, we have wreck removal. That's it. That's the wreck removal. They tore it apart and put the boat in the landfill. How about some living expenses? He was staying in the boat and needs somewhere to stay now. Fines and penalties. They surely could have fined him and penalized him if they wanted to for hitting the reef and just not being that smart. Pollution. Fortunately, they came out there and they pumped the fuel tanks out right away. But if you would have had 500 gallons of diesel on there in front of Pink Sands, there would have been a problem. We at least would have had to clean it up and probably at least looking to find some penalties there. Personal effects. And let's just assume he had charters on the boats, on the books. He didn't, but let's just assume that. So now we could collect on that coverage. We're going to move on and take another look at a different type of claim, which is more of a liability issue. A well-known yacht dropped anchor and the chain dragged across 3 basketball courts of coral reef. 80% of the reef in the area was damaged. Well, it's a big boat and it's a lot of damage. So what does he have? Well, he may have to defend himself. Third-party liability, how's that? Well, maybe there's a dive operation that made us a living diving on that reef, taking clients out there, and now they're out of business. Certainly environmental damages are going to be there. Fines and penalties, sure. So there's a significant amount of exposure. One thing I didn't say is that, with the physical damage on a yacht, we know what that loss is. If you got a $5 million boat, you lose your boat, that's $5 million. Sometimes on the liability side, you don't know what that loss could be, and it could be significant for the owner.
If I could just piggyback on that for a sec. I had a very similar claim to the ones Tom talking about, and I know in both cases, AIG and in this other case, the other insurance company worked on the owner's behalf with the governmental regulatory body to mitigate any further damages to the reef, to put out super yacht bunkers, anchors, to work with the local yacht agencies to make sure that there wasn't going to be those circumstances again. So in this case, in both of these cases, it wasn't just an issue of the insurance company coming in and paying the loss for damages. It was also, both cases, myself and another carrier coming in and working with the Department of Environmental Marine Affairs, coming in and working with other interested parties in those ecologies and making sure that it doesn't happen again. So again, I mentioned restoring the reef, putting in super yacht anchors, moorings, working with the local authorities to educate the population on how that's not going to happen again. In my case, it was a substantial liability assessment in the beginning, and then it negotiated down over time, and it's thankfully closed, but in both cases, a pretty severe amount of reef was damaged.
So what do we do? So we have a claim, and what do we do? It's not a car. You don't dial 911, tow truck comes, ambulance comes, you get a rental car, pick up your car in a couple of weeks. Being on a yacht or an accident can be a live situation, and the owner, the captain, ultimately it comes down to the owner, has responsibilities during a claim. And most owners and captains don't have claims. So during an active situation, they may not know what to do. That's why I get calls on July 4th, or even this weekend. We had a claim on a yacht coming out of Nassau, hit bottom, said he's been through there 100 times, don't know what happened. The bedding's up on one of the struts, and I got that call this weekend, and we're waiting for the surveyors to go over, see if the boat needs to be towed back or if we can make it back on its own power. So let's see what you do. Some responsibilities of the owner and the captain. Prevent further damage, active situations, live. Stop the boat from sinking, stop the boat from further damage. Notify the insurance company or your insurance agent as quickly as possible. Because like Sean says, they can bring in remedies to stop further loss at that time. So when we bring the boat to the yard or service facility, you have to give opportunity to the insurance company to inspect the boat. Pre-approval to start repairs, initiate repairs on the boat. We've had clients call up and say, hey, I just spent $50,000 because I bumped bottom, and here's the receipt. Can you have the insurance company send me a check? Well, that was 2 months ago, and that's just not the way it's going to work. They want to inspect, and they want to see that, you know, the damages, you know, what the damage is and how to properly repair it. One thing I always advise is go to the best yard possible. Go to the yard that can best possibly fix the yacht first. We've seen on occasion where the captain brings the boat to maybe a little smaller, inferior yard, but it's really hard to get the insurance company to pay a towing cost to tow it down to Rivovich or another yard that could be miles and miles away, because now you're realizing you want to get the boat in a more prominent yard. Last, in some situations when we're dealing with a very in-depth and serious claim that could take years to, you know, to fix or repair, I always advise to hire an independent surveyor first of all, they look at the initial damages and follow the repair process and do a final survey of the boat. That is most of our topic, but I'm going to bring Sean in to expand on this. Also, what do you do? What if you're in like remote locations? How does a boat get repaired, or how does the insurance company help a yacht owner in maybe some exotic locations?
Sure. Well, I mean, first on that list, I agree with all your points. I think first and foremost, preventing loss of life, right? That, you know, we all don't want to spend out dollars to pay for repairs on boats, but the most important thing is to prevent loss of life. And I think the rest of these can be summed up with the theory of acting like a prudent uninsured. You know, as Tom mentioned, every policy is a little bit different. So, you know, in terms of choosing a yard, some companies may say you need to go to the closest yard. Well, that might not be a very good place to fix your boat. Some places use terms, or some companies use terms like what's reasonable, and they don't define what reasonable is. What may be reasonable to me may not be reasonable to you or your client or a surveyor. So, you know, there's a bit of negotiation, but I think by and large, if your client acts like a prudent uninsured and acts like they're spending their own money and is looking to be indemnified within reason, most insurance companies, language being what it is, are going to work with the client. And you know, that's really, I think, what kind of summarizes what to do in the event of a claim. It's a relationship with the client. There's contractual relationships, but that relationship is really important. From a global standpoint, you know, we have a network, as do most insurance companies, of surveyors, of salvers, of vessel assist companies, anybody, you know, mechanics, you name it, whoever in the industry, all around the globe, to be able to call to arms immediately to get assistance to the vessel, whether that's after they've made it into a home port or whether that's getting a towing company out there. We had a boat that was stolen out of South Florida, and we wanted to find that boat. It's a 65-foot Viking, so the claim came in very quickly. We got airplanes in the air to search down the boat. We got all the bridge operators up and down the river to see if they had seen it. Thankfully, it was a bright yellow hull, so it was pretty easy to spot. You know, with that, we have that kind of global network, as do a lot of insurers that specialize in this line of business to be able to provide services for the client. So it doesn't matter whether it's in Florida or whether it's in France or whether it's in, Tom said the Maldives earlier. Yeah, we've got it taken care of.
Anyone have questions? Follow up? Take advantage of Sean while he's here? In the back. Jeff, did you have a question?
You mentioned the day workers as crew. If if there's a yacht that has a normal, they run with 3 crew, and then they hire an extra person because they're going to have a lot of guests and they're going to take a 2-week trip, that per diem, is that considered Jones Act, or is that a contract that's not covered?
Well, let's look at, define what we're calling a day worker. And for the purpose of this discussion, we're calling a day worker not a temporary crew member, but someone that is a marine artisan, repair person, detailer. But if the primary vocation and purpose of that person being on the vessel is as a crew member in service of the yacht, then they are a crew member. It's the cases where the yacht is going into a yard and they hire independent contractors to do work, and those independent contractors may or may not have their own insurance, and the yard is requiring that they show insurance. And so sometimes we see requests to have these part-time day workers or independent contractors added on to the yacht's policy as crew. And I don't know of a yacht policy that will cover them as crew knowingly. In fact, most of the time it's excluded. But in the cases where you have a part-time crew member, and that's really their job and they're really in service of the yacht, then absolutely the coverage should be afforded to them. The only caveat to that, as Tom mentioned, is that the number of crew that's employed on the yacht needs to be properly reflected and understood by the insurance company. So you don't have a situation where there's 10 crew on the boat and the insurance company thinks that there's 5 crew on the boat. That's a very different exposure to the insurance company.
I need to move my buyer's Sea Ray. Am I covered? I need to move it from one marina to a yard.
Trick question.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a trick question. It's a yes and no. You are covered as a permissive user, but the policy is not going to pay for your crew welfare, because you're not a hired crew member at that point. Now, the policy will pay for any damage that you cause to the vessel, and it possibly could pay for liability you cause of the yacht to another party. It depends on the policy whether or not it provides your first party liability. But the situation of whether or not you're liable as an individual will depend on a lot of different factors. We've got attorneys in the room that can probably all argue that. But you are, in terms of whether the yacht's covered, the answer is yes. Whether the liability of the yacht to the other party you may have caused damage to, yes. Not your crew welfare, and potentially not your first party liability. It depends on the policy.
Jeff.
Yeah, 2 questions, if I may. The first one is, in the beginning of your presentation, you talked about indemnity and first pay. It seems to me first pay is the better option. Why would a client choose the other? And on balance, what percentage of your insured fleet is which?
Good question. Well, like I said, each company has certain, different appetites, and we try to place coverage the best fit with the best company. So if we try to put the client with the best fit, generally the premium matches also. We'll just see with indemnity and the London policies is, sure, there's very certain situations where they're applicable and required, and they can offer very high limits at a very reasonable premium, and that's certainly consideration. Though when we're dealing with the U.S. owners and a yacht that fits in the appetite of a domestic company, I certainly see significant advantages to being there, even if it's maybe it's a slightly more premium, and you would pay a slightly more premium because the way the difference in how they pay claims.
Great, thanks. And the second question is, Sean mentioned resources that AIG deploys when a client's in need. If a client's in Cuba and hits a reef, what do you do then? How do you handle a situation like that?
Wow, well, my favorite 4-letter word just came up. Cuba. Well, so it's an interesting topic, Cuba, because there's been obviously a lot of development about people going to Cuba recently, and some insurers, both domestic and abroad in London, have allowed for navigation to Cuba and provided a certain level of insurance coverage to Cuba. We are among them. We've insured about 14 boats, not huge numbers, but about 14 boats going to Cuba. There are someone mentioned in their presentation earlier today, the Office of Foreign Asset Control, OFAC. All insurance companies that operate in the United States and many insurance companies that operate abroad with U.S. security are all subject to certain U.S. sanctions laws that prohibit us from participating in any form of trade with a sanctioned country, which Cuba being among them. So we are not able to pay a claim on a first-party basis for losses that happen in Cuba. I mentioned that the client has to act like a prudent uninsured. In this case, they really do. And it's not just with us, it's with any carrier that is U.S. or many London carriers that are also using this sanctions language or subject to it, whereby the client has to go through the loss, pay their own way, get the boat repaired, do it so legally, get back to the U.S., and then we will treat and adjust that claim on a reimbursement basis. That's all fine and good when it's a small property loss, but if it's a liability loss where there's a legal incident and representation that needs to occur in Cuba, that's a problem. And I think our clients, all clients that want to go there, I think need to understand the additional risk that they're taking on by going to Cuba. We will entertain the risks, as will our colleagues in London, but there's an additional level of risk that the client needs to take. So to directly answer your question, I can't send anybody to Cuba to get the boat back. The guy's got to get the boat back on his or her own, and then we can adjust the claim from there.
Are there any underwriters that are not subject to the restrictions of those sanctions that you could employ for that aspect of the coverage?
If I understand the question correctly, is there an availability to have somebody cover just the rider to go to Cuba?
Correct.
And not the rest of the annual policy term?
Correct.
Insurance companies don't like to cover just what may be viewed as the more extreme part of the risk. So I would never say never, because it's a weird market these days. However, I highly doubt that any carrier or program would want to insure just the Cuban navigation portion. But any carrier, syndicate, insurance program, structure that involves U.S. security at some level is subject to this sanctions language. Some are more transparent about the limitations than others. I think it's something that the client who wants to go needs to be very detailed about what is actually being provided in terms of insurance policy.
Tom or Sean, I have a question. And I'm sorry if you've already answered this, but would you clarify for me when Tom was talking about the medical coverage, is there a collective wisdom to encourage owners when they're insuring crew to do it outside the hull coverage at all? In other words, provide a separate insurance coverage for the crew so as, let's say, every time a crew member gets the cold or flu or whatever, it's not going in any way possible going to affect it under the coverage provided by Jones or Federal Harbor Worker, Longshoreman, and all that.
Sure.
So real quick, so health insurance is not covered.
Health insurance.
Accidental, so that's health insurance. That's not covered underneath the medical. So medical is an injury, not health related. Doesn't offer checkups.
But what about health insurance?
Sure, on a crew with a larger size crew, we always recommend that they obtain separate medical or health policies, 100%. It's what it also does is provides it. You can put it in the part of the compensation plan of the crew. It's very easy to put that in there for an owner and everyone to understand that. But also, it preserves the insurance policy and the premium because a lot of policies they don't like claims, unfortunately. Sorry, Sean. But and when you get a claim and they see a history of claim and we see little broken fingers or a little one stitch, sprained my ankle, they see the repetitive of this, they're going to blame the owner. And they're going to look at the owner and says, well, he can't control his crew as a bad captain or something, poor management of the crew. and they're either going to increase his rates or they're going to, the alarm is going off and they're going to cancel them.
So as I said, the hull coverage would respond, but the collective wisdom is for outside
But it wouldn't
health
respond
coverage.
for a health issue
Yeah.
such as colds, flu, annual checkups, and those items.
Yeah, just to clarify, the P&I coverage will respond to the crew welfare typically. The health insurance portion, health issues that are not sustained while the crew member is in the course of employment or don't have anything to do with their duties, I always recommend that clients or managers or brokers place separate crew medical policies. It's also, a good thing to do as an employer. Some carriers that are providing the crew welfare coverage will require that there's a separate crew medical placement being made. Some don't, and some do it depending on the risk being quoted and the pricing being quoted back to the client. We do all the above. It just depends on the situation, but crew medical from the P&I, to Tom's point, is a good idea from the claims management standpoint as well.
And one thing on the yacht policy will be in excess over the separate medical policy, where if there's a lawsuit against the owner.
Any other questions? Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks,